Hi, everyone. In just a few minutes, we'll get started with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's Ocean Twilight Zone live presentation, Illuminating the Abyss, Inspiration, Exploration, and Discovery in the Ocean Twilight Zone. We still got a lot of people joining us, so thank you for your patience.
Welcome to a special presentation of Ocean Twilight Zone Live from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, or sometimes WHOI. Tonight's event is Illuminating the Abyss, Inspiration, Exploration, and Discovery in the Ocean Twilight Zone. Tonight's online event is made possible in part by the Avatar Alliance Foundation, Dalio Philanthropies, and OceanX. We'd also like to thank the generous supporters of WHOI's Ocean Twilight Zone project, Dalio Philanthropies, the Robertson Foundation, the James family, the Craig and Susan McCaw Foundation, and 2 anonymous donors. And we especially would like to acknowledge the innovative TBA 21 Academy for commissioning the stunning artwork Vertical Migration, which you'll hear more about later tonight. My name is Tatiana Schlossberg. I'm a climate change and environmental journalist and author of Inconspicuous Consumption, the environmental impact you don't know you have. And I'll be moderating tonight's event. Thank you for joining us. Before we hear from our presenters, I'd like to let you know how you can best participate in tonight's discussion on Zoom. Throughout the evening, our speakers will be taking questions from all of you. If you'd like to participate in this live Q&A, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen and type your question in the window that appears. You might be more familiar with the chat function in Zoom, but for tonight, please ask your questions using the Q&A function instead. We often get hundreds of questions, so I apologize if we don't get to yours while we're live. You can ask questions at any time starting now. I also want to let you know that we are recording this event, and the recording will be made available on the whoi.edu website. We had more than 4,000 people pre-register to join us tonight, which is particularly exciting because it is also Climate Week in New York, which should really be every week, but we are very excited to be gathering for this important discussion about climate change and the Twilight Zone with these experts and all of you. So thank you so much for being here and welcome. Tonight, we are joined by 4 leading ocean explorers and advocates. They are ocean explorer and Academy Award-winning filmmaker James Cameron, the founder of Dalio Philanthropies and co-founder of OceanX, Ray Dalio, the president and director of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, Peter Menocal, and the founder, CEO, and senior scientist of the Ocean Research and Conservation Association, Edith Widder. We are here to talk about pushing boundaries and seeking solutions to the Earth's most pressing problems, deep in the ocean's twilight zone and beyond. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so excited to get a chance to speak with you all and selfishly and learn from you all. Edie, I'd like to start off our conversation with a question for you. You have spent your career studying life in the deep ocean. In fact, you were one of the first scientists to descend into the Twilight Zone, turn off the lights, and actually see firsthand what was down there in the darkness. Can you start by telling us what is the Ocean Twilight Zone and what it's like down there?
So the Ocean Twilight Zone is defined by light. It's a range in the open ocean where there's insufficient light for photosynthesis. And on the graphic you're seeing here, it says 100 meters. I was taught 200 meters, but that was a long time ago. And below that depth, there's insufficient light for photosynthesis, but there's plenty of light to see by. That extends all the way down to 1,000 meters or 3,280 feet. So the other part of the Twilight Zone that's defined by light is all the animals within that zone that make their own light, called bioluminescence. And these range from the microscopic, like bacteria and dinoflagellates, up to the gigantic, like colossal squid and even siphonophore chains, which we may be hearing more about tonight. They can get as long as 150 feet long. These creatures, even the ones that aren't bioluminescent, and they're very much in the minority, often less than 25% that don't make light, they are still influenced by light. And so they have fantastic eyes. For example, giant squid have the largest eyes of any animals known in the animal kingdom. And so actually that was a trick that we drew on to be able to draw the giant squid in, using its attraction to bioluminescence to get the first recordings of giant squid in its natural habitat. And that was on Ray Dalio's ship, the Elucia. I called up Ray and said, we got it. And now Ray has gone on and produced an even more amazing platform for exploration that is recording bioluminescence in ways that has never been possible before. And I'm just so thrilled to be able to soon be able to share it with the public in more than just my words.
It's so beautiful. I mean, it's hard to kind of imagine from all the way up here that's a place that's so seemingly dark, has so much going on. But it's really wonderful to hear about your collaboration. So Ray, you have been a leading supporter of Woods Hole Oceanographic's efforts to explore and understand the Ocean Twilight Zone. What was it about, the Twilight Zone versus the Sunlight Zone that got you interested in exploring?
Well, first of all, the whole idea of the exploration that basically the water line of the ocean is about halfway up. The tallest mountain and the deepest part of the sea is about the same distance, but it's 72% of the ocean, of the world's surface. So it's more than twice the size of all the Earth and all the mountains and all the continents. And so to go explore it. And then what was exciting is, the aliens, it's another world. So it's just so important, but also so exciting. You're not going to see aliens if you go to outer space. You got to go down to see these unbelievable aliens. So it was very exciting personally, it was exciting. And personally, it was important. And just to be able to work with Woods Hole and Edie and Jim, just imagine how lucky I was to be able to work with them and get exposure through them to see all these things and then support scientists to do that work. So it's thrilling. That's why we're so excited to be able to do a show, Ocean Explorer, with Jim and Edie and others that will, like Jacques Cousteau, bring people down there so everybody can see it, because it's just so exciting and it's so important.
And what was it when you saw the video of the giant squid? Can you talk a little bit about, what it was like to see that for the first time?
Well, there were 81 dives and they only found it on one. So Edie first calls me, yeah, and she said exactly that. We got it, we got the picture, and then right after, and then of course the world saw it. But as she was referring also to the case where we saw this, to give you one example, but it was just mind blowing. Went down, and I think it was about 800 meters down. And I was told, take a flash, like a flash camera. And I took this, we turned on the light of the sub and we looked around, and there's marine snow, which just looks like a lot of bits and pieces of stuff, tiny, closed the lights, flashed, and then there's this flashing back of all of these little animals, and that was like a fireworks display, and it was mind-blowing. So those are the experiences that I've seen in the Twilight Zone. So when Woods Hole said that they wanted to explore the Twilight Zone, naturally I was excited about it, but also from the protection point of view, if we don't go down there and understand it well, then also as others are exploring, it could be damaged. So that's what was exciting.
That is a perfect lead into my next question for Jim, which is, Jim, I know you have a long-standing interest in the Twilight Zone and the far reaches of the ocean. A few years ago, you published an op-ed with the title, "We should be exploring the ocean Twilight Zone, not exploiting it." What did you see happening or happening in the future that compelled you to write the op-ed or to be concerned about the Twilight Zone and harm there?
Well, I mean, the thing is that the Twilight Zone is just full of trillions and trillions of animals. It's thought that one particular species, this bristlemouth fish, there are probably more of them down there on a given day than there are stars in our galaxy. They're thought to be maybe the largest number of an individual species of a vertebrate on the planet. And that's just one example. And we talk about all these other soft-bodied invertebrate animals like the siphonophores and all that sort of thing. Well, what they're doing is they're taking in, they're eating the plankton, the phytoplankton, which are taking the sunlight and creating, nutrients, right? So what you got is this vast kind of animal migration down there. They stayed way down in the dark by day, so they don't get eaten themselves, because everybody's trying to eat everybody down there. It's always going on. That party never stops. And then when the sun goes down, they all come up to feed on the phytoplankton, right? So you got this big sort of thing going up and down, up and down. It's the largest moving biomass on the planet, right? So what that acts as is a big carbon pump. Takes carbon from near the surface, pumps it down into the deep ocean. And a lot of it winds up staying there. Like how much? How about as much as all of the carbon that the US is putting into the atmosphere every single year is being pumped down into the deep ocean, where it stays for hundreds or even thousands of years. Well, how does that affect us? Well, we're trying to control the carbon that we're pumping into the atmosphere so our thermostat doesn't run away on us. And, this is climate week. And like you said, it should be every week. So we need to be aware, just as a global community, not just the scientists, that are working on this problem. We need to collectively know about this. All right. So where does that become something that everybody should be thinking about? Well, because it's very difficult to study the Twilight Zone. Right? You got these soft-bodied animals that don't really show up very well on sonar, which is the only way we can see underwater is by sound. Light only travels a short distance. Radio waves don't travel in there at all, so you can't use radar. So we're spoiled by Doppler radar, and we can see what the atmosphere is doing in real time and what weather fronts are moving, and we've been spoiled by that for more than half a century. We don't get a picture of the ocean like that. We have to go down there. We have to go down there with instruments, with cameras, with buoys, with fish tags, all kinds of things. We got to put instruments down in that water to understand it, right? If we don't understand it, we won't be able to quantify how much carbon it's pulling out of the atmosphere, how much heat it's pulling out of the atmosphere, right? And at the same time, we've got commercial fisheries are starting to get really interested in all that biomass that I was talking about. And how can we capture that? How can we harvest it? How can we feed it to in mariculture? How do we feed it to fish so we can sell it to people? So pretty much whenever we as humans get interested in something economically, we start destroying it. It's just a pattern, right? So what concerned me was this idea that we were going to have a deforestation of the oceans. We're going to go in and do the same damn thing we're doing in the Amazon and everywhere else. And of course, we understand that deforestation affects climate, because those trees are pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. So I kind of foresaw, and of course, I'm tipped off by all the scientists who are working on this day in, day out, whom I vastly respect, like Edith and Peter's folks at Woods Hole Oceanographic. So I just felt I needed to say something about that. And I think it's something that during Climate Week, we should all be aware of.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, that you bring up such an important point, which is that you, saying that I certainly didn't come up with what I've heard before, which is you can't manage what you can't measure.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's so important for climate change and figuring out, where we're headed and how to avoid that. And Peter, you're in New York right now for Climate Week. Of course, you lead this organization, which is focused on ocean research. Jim touched on it a little bit, but maybe you can explain a bit more the connection between the Twilight Zone and global climate, just the carbon pump and regulation of temperature and atmosphere. Obviously, I know that's a tough ask, but to do that in just a few minutes, but that would be great to just hear a little bit more from you about that.
Great, Tatiana. Thanks so much. And it's really a pleasure to be here with everyone. I mean, simply put, the oceans make the Earth habitable. So much of what Jim just spoke about is really this fundamental role of the oceans in regulating climate and making it so that it's habitable for us and for other organisms as well. The most recent intergovernmental panel on climate change report, so-called the AR6 report that just came out about a month ago, said unequivocally that dangerous climate change is here. It's here now. It's manifesting as widespread, it's rapid, and it's intensifying. And as a world leader in ocean science, the Woods Hole Oceanographic really must lead the research and the discovery, the exploration that we're hearing about tonight, and the importance of communicating the ocean's critical role in regulating global climate. And by regulating literally the carbon dioxide that's gone into the atmosphere so far from human activities, were it not for the ocean, the Earth would be uninhabitable now. The oceans have absorbed 90%, actually 1% of the excess heat that comes from the buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The oceans have taken up about a third of all human emissions that have been emitted since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So the oceans have really buffered us from the worst effects of climate change. And so as Jim noted, the biologic pump is this way in which organisms utilize the sunlight and the nutrients in the surface waters, and they take the carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere that's now dissolved in the ocean, just like a carbonated beverage. They take that carbon and they form tissues, and they form algae, and then that forms the base of a food chain that then goes to zooplankton, and the fish eat the zooplankton. And there's this whole circle of life, if you will, in the upper parts of the ocean that are in regular communication with the atmosphere. Where it gets interesting and where it involves the Twilight Zone is that this organic rain, so-called marine snow, what Rachel Carlson called the greatest snowstorm on Earth, is that as these particles settle through the water column, they reach the Twilight Zone that Edith was talking about so eloquently. And this is a place where we have this abundance of life that's reprocessing all this organic matter. Now, roughly about 90% of the organic carbon that comes to the Twilight Zone gets recycled and gets recirculated, if you will, on a timescale of about a century. But about 10% of it makes this rain through what's called the midnight zone, or the abyssal regions of the deep ocean. And that's where carbon can be stored for centuries to even millennia. And so as we start looking at this biologic pump, this diel migration, this daily migration that Jim was talking about, this acts as a pump that actually is moving the carbon down to the depths of the ocean. And so you can see in this animation here, for example, think of this like a cantilever pump that's taking up the carbon in the ocean, and turning it into organic material that then is raining down to the deeper parts of the water, where the age of the waters are centuries to millennia old. And so they're basically sequestered away from the atmosphere for a long time. So when we start looking at this twilight zone and the ocean's ability to take up carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it at depth for hundreds to even thousands of years, this is one of the things that came up in the most recent IPCC report, was the ocean's ability to assist us with understanding ocean carbon storage or ocean carbon removal, where that by stimulating primary productivity in the ocean, you can have more of this export of the carbon to the deep ocean, where it can be stored durably for over a century, even to millennia. But to do this, this is this magnificence, this beauty of the deep ocean. And we really have to get to understand what's happening in the oceans. And if I could, just for a moment, we're seeing, for instance, with the Ocean Twilight Zone, the network that we've built. We've now insonified, we've built a network that is actually 750,000 square kilometers. So there's a sound sensor off of Martha's Vineyard. There's another one off of Bermuda, insonifying this volume of the ocean that's nearly 1,000,000 square kilometers. And so there's this interplay of these various vehicles and robots and fish tags and sensors that are illuminating the surface. And in fact, one of these is this multi-frequency bioacoustic mooring. It actually is like an inverted echo sounder or inverted fish finder, if you will. And so it sends sound waves up, and you can actually track this migration that Jim was talking about so eloquently. You can see this beautiful migration. You can see these waves. This is what we're talking about, this largest migration on the planet by a large margin. Remember, the oceans are 3/4 of the planet. And if I can just call your attention to, so these data are literally 6 weeks old. If you look at those little smiley faces on the lower right-hand side, those are individual fish within the OTZ, within this deep portion of the ocean around, in this case, about 600 meters water depth. And this is something that both Edie and Jim and Ray know, I think, quite a bit more than I do on this. They've seen it for themselves.
I'm going to just switch over to audience questions, because we're getting a lot of really great questions, a lot on these topics. But maybe just for Edie and perhaps for Peter, from Katie in Pennsylvania, how is climate change affecting animals in the Twilight Zone, and what can the Twilight Zone specifically tell us about climate change?
You go
Edie?
first, Peter.
Okay. So one of the oceans are changing in really rapid ways. When I began my PhD 30 years ago, we were told that the ocean is going to be the slowest to respond, and that the signals there should be the most diminished compared to what we see happening on land. And in fact, what we're seeing is this very rapid warming of the ocean. It's becoming increasingly stratified. And it's believed that increasing stratification is reducing the primary productivity in the oceans, basically because it's creating a layer, if you will, on top of the ocean. But the oceans are acidifying as well, and these are really impacting the planet as a whole. But I think I want to allow Edie a chance to respond, because she's seen it with her own eyes.
Yeah, so when CO2 dissolves in seawater, it forms carbonic acid. And so we have actually acidified our oceans, which is it's a staggering volume to think that we could have changed the chemistry of such a vast portion of our planet. And it's having effects on calcifiers like coral reefs and other organisms that produce shells. It's having untold effects in other ways. We know that some of the oxygen minimum zone is expanding, so there's less oxygen, and the animals are being pushed up towards the surface, which is in conflict with their need to avoid bright light. So we're completely altering the structure of this environment, and it is the machinery of life. And we don't even have a proper user's manual, let alone a repair manual. So we really need to get on the stick to figure out what kind of impacts these are going to have on our long-term life support machinery.
Yeah, there's another question or combination of two from Emma, also in Pennsylvania, and from Megan, which is, about the idea of using the deep ocean as a way to sequester carbon. I think some people are wondering how that would work, to sort of artificially do that, and also what the consequences might be of using the ocean as a, kind of harnessing that, the ocean's ability to store carbon, to do so on an even larger scale than is already happening.
I'll be happy to weigh in on that. I think, first and foremost, we have to reduce emissions. That's the number one way that we can get our hands on this. But the concern is, and this is what came up in the IPCC report, is that it's going to be hard to do it at the speed and completeness that we need to avoid dangerous warming of ahead of increasing of a +2 degrees centigrade warming. But our ability to really understand the ocean is really the key thing here. So as the carbon is increasing, the ocean's taking it up. Our concern is that it's going to be having greater carbon flux to the deep sea. So one of the ways that this can happen is through actually adding soluble iron to the surface. It's called the Geritol solution. It's a way of stimulating greater productivity. But just as Edie said, we have no idea how this would impact the oceans. And before we should even consider anything like this, we have to really understand these ecosystems, because this is, we can't be heading into this with the idea of using the oceans to our benefit. We really have to understand the oceans. And so, in my opinion, the Ocean Twilight Zone has really afforded us the first deep glimpse of how the ocean functions at this really large scale.
I think it's really dangerous to think that that's even a possibility in any kind of near term. What we know right now is that the oceans are pulling out 6 billion tons of carbon a year, and we're degrading that. We're degrading that process. We can't be taking away with one hand, putting in with the other. We've got to figure out how to stop doing the damage that we're doing to preserve the carbon pump and its effectiveness. That should be our highest priority. Yes, if we want to do research to figure out how 100 years from now, we might be able to increase primary productivity and get even more carbon going in, cool, that's great. But what I'm worried is that people start to think about these things as, oh, technology is going to race over the horizon at the last second like the cavalry and save us all. And I call that dangerous techno-optimism. So notwithstanding the fact that I think it's a really good question and people need to be looking at it, Peter's absolutely right. We got to know a lot more before we can do that. But what we do know now with absolute certainty is that it's a really, really powerful pump to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, and we're degrading its effectiveness. So we need to work on that problem first.
If I could just add a punctuation to Jim's great comment there. I mean, so for example, if you could flip a switch and say, okay, there's no primary productivity in the ocean, how would the atmosphere respond? It would immediately increase by about 200 parts per million, or increase by almost 50%. So the oceans are doing this incredible service to humanity by the very function that we're trying to protect.
I'm going to just ask one more, fun question from the audience, because I can't resist. We had got a question from Sylvia Earle.
Hey, Sylvia.
Hey, Sylvia. Her deepness.
Yes. Who's asked, are there plans to use human-occupied vehicles to explore the Twilight Zone?
We're doing it.
Absolutely.
You know that, Sylvia. That was a tee up. You teed that one.
That's a softball. I mean, I think that what obviously ROVs are very important, and the kind of sensor network that Peter was talking about are very important. But there's nothing like engaging the imagination of all of us, that are stuck on dry land most of the time, and looking at these alien creatures that Ray was talking about. I mean, look at his enthusiasm for the deep ocean from getting into a sub. Now, ocean science is lucky to have Ray. The oceans themselves are lucky to have Ray, have had that kind of, that Ray, that you've gotten religion, that you've been down there and you've seen the wonder with your own eyes. And you wouldn't have had that response, I don't think, if you were looking at a TV monitor, watching what an ROV is seeing. I'm not saying they're not a powerful tool, but there's something about being there and then coming back and sharing that inspiration with people. And look what it's doing. I mean, Ray, you're dumping a lot of money and your time and energy into the one of the best research ships on the planet, some of the best subs, and a lot of things are happening because of your individual epiphany. I'd just love to be able to share that more with as many people as possible.
Well, that's what we're going to do, because that was your idea. So the partnership is going to be, you're going to see Edie seeing this fireworks display that we're talking about. Everybody's going to be able to see that thanks to the whole partnership that we've got going.
And to share Edie's enthusiasm. I mean, Edie, you've probably spent a lot more time in subs than I have and seen a lot of things that I only wish I had seen.
It's just incredible to me that we finally got that on video, and we're going to be able to share it, because people get excited about a fireworks display, but you don't understand what it's like to be in the middle of a fireworks display and be causing it. It's
and they're communicating with you.
Yes,
like
exactly.
There's this flash, and then there's the point, and they're responding all over.
They're saying, go away, go away. Leave us alone. Turn off your lights. Bad guys can see me.
Actually, I think they're telling us they're part of the carbon pump.
Yes, exactly.
I'm here.
Respect us. We're helping you out here.
I'm going to ask just one more question from the audience, which is from Abigail from Minnesota, and for Ray. Maybe you could talk a little bit about, why you have, my light. I'll just keep going. Why you've decided to, put so much money into ocean exploration, and why there seems to be so much in space exploration, and not the same level in ocean research and exploration. And what can we do to change that?
It's such a good question. It's something like 120 times as much money goes into space exploration than ocean exploration. Honestly, it's so much more thrilling and so much more important, the ocean exploration, because you see all the things that we're talking about. And then, as for all the reasons that were said, it's so important. So, that's why when you have contact with it, you fall in love with it and you understand how important it is. And so that's the reason why. And it's the curious question as to why it's the spending is the other way around. And cost effective. It is cost effective.
Yeah, and that relates to one of the questions that we had for Jim, which is that you've written about how the moonshot drove science and engineering needed for humans to reach the moon in 1969 as a unifying moment in human history, and you've called for a similarly focused effort to explore the Ocean Twilight Zone. So related to what Ray was saying, why do we need an equivalent for the ocean? And besides the money, what are some of the challenges to getting us there?
Well, I think we've talked about some of the challenges that you can't see down there. You see by sound and so on, and we know so much less about the ocean. This is oft quoted. We haven't even mapped the seafloor to the level of accuracy that we've mapped the surface of Mars. I think in the back of our minds, there's this sense that, we'll go out to the stars and we'll find some cool planets to live on, and then we can sort of wad up the Earth like a used Kleenex and throw it away. But we have no guarantee that we're going to have capability to go to other star systems for thousands of years. And Mars, great. I love Mars. I'm a big fan of Mars, but its oceans dried up and blew away, a couple billion years ago. It's a crummy planet. We got the good planet right here, and we're just basically destroying it about as fast as humanly possible. So we've got to rein in. We've got to take responsibility, and to do that, we've got to be motivated. And it's not just going to be the negative motivations like more forest fires, more people migrating because they can't grow crops anymore, and their homeland is turning into a desert, and all these problems that are going to confront us because of climate change. We need positive motivation as well. Ray talks about the aliens down there. You want to see the most amazing aliens? You don't go into space. You go down there and you look closely. And, I've always said that on every dive I've ever made, you will see things you've never seen before. but you might every once in a while see something nobody's ever seen before. And some of these animals that are down there they're all soft. A lot of them are very soft-bodied, and they don't survive getting hauled up in fishing nets or even in scientific nets. You got to go down and look at them and photograph them and study them and measure. So anyway, so we need to put our energy into this much more so. It's our survival. We're not going to survive as a human species because of information we learn about Jupiter and Neptune and all that. I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love space. But in terms of survival, we need to prioritize the oceans much, much more than we do.
Just to add one thing that's exciting. There's so much technological advancement that's now making it so amazing. So we can go down, well, Jim went all the way down in his Challenger, all the way down, but man can go down. But also we can take on a remote operated vehicle, we can take these cameras that make 360 degree, 3D, 360. You could put it on the Oculus or the equivalent, and you can pick any spot in the ocean and you can bring there. You pick the spot and you can go there, and it's like standing in the front of this vehicle and you can see it. And we're going to be able to bring it back to you. So that's what you can look forward to because of the new technologies.
Right.
Yeah, and speaking of, I read in a book, Fathoms, The World in a Whale. I don't know if anyone has read it, but that, we had a picture of the Earth from space before we had a picture of a whale in the ocean. And so that's always just amazing. That kind of knowledge gap is really incredible to think about.
Right.
So, and speaking of the technology and exploration, Ray, I know you and your son Mark launched OceanX back in 2018 to explore the ocean and bring it back to the world. We've touched on this a little bit, but maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about OceanX and how you're making that happen and bringing it back to everybody else.
Well, that's right. Back then, we got this great ship, Alucia. And then we went to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute and said, how do we do this exploring? And they gave us the scientists and the people who would be able to run the ship and so on. And then we brought down media. And Jim had worked on designing some of the ship, and he said, well, you've got to make sure that you share it. And so we did a bunch, and that was when we discovered the giant squid, which was with Edith and so on. And we've done that for the 11 years. And then Jim says to me, well, why don't we do what we now call OceanX? So we built this great new ship, Ocean Explorer, and which has the best exploration equipment, plus it's got the best media because Jim Cameron knows how to do this. And he made this very, very futuristic and cutting edge so that we could capture all of this stuff. Real time, phenomenal, all sorts of things. So we're going to, it'll be on National Geographic and Disney Plus, and everybody's going to be able to see it. And so you're going to go down with it. And that's Ocean Explorer, that's OceanX, and it's in partnership with these good people.
The subs go down, the ship doesn't go down, hopefully. I made that movie a long time ago.
Did I say that? Not go down.
Well, that's so great to have this kind of public facing thing that I think is so hidden often to people. So that's really great, and that we'll all be able to see it soon. Peter, for your part, can you talk a little bit about the outreach and public awareness part of the Ocean Twilight Zone project at Woods Hole?
Yeah, thank you. There's a saying that science isn't complete unless it's communicated. And so how we actually bring this discovery, you can get a sense of the energy from our panelists here about what it's like to be there, and how people interact with that information is one of the things that we can really work with. And so we've actually launched a campaign just this year called Keep It Weird. It's actually keepitweird.org for those of you who want to pull it up. And basically it's a way for you to understand the weirdness of what's down there, but within the context of sort of how, what makes it weird, what's its role in this interesting ecosystem. And so there's kind of a mapping of these amazing animals that are down a half a mile deep in the ocean, and things that actually speak to you as an individual. The other thing we've been looking at is a children's book, a way of actually looking at having the story that we can engage really the youngest people here. And this is where the weird things are. And actually, as one of the exercises you can pull up on Keep It Weird, is that you can identify sort of which of these organisms you might identify with. And this is actually part of the storyline of this children's book as well. And then on the sort of larger front, we're also very deeply engaged in ocean policy. As Jim really said very eloquently, so much of what we have to do here is to protect the oceans. And so we can use this advance in engineering and technology and submersibles and telepresence to really convey what's going on down there, but really why it's so important to us. And that's really, one of the hardest challenges, is to convey why something down there in the bottom of the ocean is of value to, a farmer in Iowa. And, sure enough, it absolutely is. But so much of our responsibility is to make that case. And this is actually where ocean policy really comes to bear. And this is something we're doing at the Woods Hole Oceanographic as well.
That's great. And well, speaking of books, I wanted to talk a little about Edie's book, which I know a lot of people in the audience have read and have said that they're enjoying. For those of you who haven't, it's called Below the Edge of Darkness, a memoir of exploring light and life in the deep sea. And I hope everyone will check it out if they haven't already. But in the epilogue, you write about making the case for optimism. And I was just hoping you could talk a little bit about why optimism is so important. And I know it's easy if you work in this field to feel discouraged. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so starting an environmental not-for-profit has made me very aware of how much eco-anxiety we're up against and how detrimental it is to any progress, because I think too often in the scientific community that if we just explain it a little better about just how really awful everything is, that people will get it and do something about it. But I think it's having the opposite effect, is people just shut down. They don't want to hear it anymore. And I think Jim touched on this. We want to appeal to people's strength rather than their weakness. And our strength as a species is exploration. We are explorers. The first time a baby crawls away from the safety of its mother's arms to see what's around that corner, they're exploring their natural world. And exploring the natural world is always been key to our survival. And so I think we need explorers now more than ever. But it's really important when I talk about this optimism that I get across what kind of optimism I'm talking about here, because I am really afraid of the techno-optimism that Jim mentioned. It scares the heck out of me, because it's so ignorant of just how little we really understand these systems. And we start diddling with them, we're going to get in even bigger trouble than we're in right now. So we want to foster that sense of exploration. And I used to go into quite a bit of detail about different types of optimism. But over the years, I've found that it's just simpler to refer people to the character of Mark Watney in The Martian.
We're going to science the shit out of this.
Yeah, exactly. and he's hopeless. He's trapped on Mars alone, and there doesn't seem to be any hope. But he keeps working the problem in the order of priority. And he actually is enjoying the challenge. You can tell he is enjoying the challenge, but you just have to keep working the problem. Explorers are naturally not afraid of the monsters at the edge of the map, and they're willing to accept failure after failure after failure, because they are optimistic that in the end they will prevail. That's the kind of optimism we need right now.
Yes.
Well put.
I agree. And obviously, and I think that's part of what Climate Week is all about, I hope. So we've been talking about raising awareness of the Ocean Twilight Zone and and Climate Week. And so we have a surprise for all of you watching tonight. Woods Hole Oceanographic, OceanX, and Jim's Avatar Alliance Foundation have been collaborating on a very special project in New York City in honor of Climate Week, which is called Vertical Migration. And I think we have a live shot of that for you. So can everyone see? Okay. So what we're looking at is a live shot of the signature tower of the UN in New York. This stunning 505-foot tall projection is by the Danish artist group Superflex. It is their interpretation of a Twilight Zone siphonophore, a colony of specialized gelatinous marine animals that work together to enhance group survival. The projection was developed by the nonprofit arts organizations TVA 21. Oh my God, that's so cool.
That is so great.
That's great.
Academy and Art 2030 with support from Avatar Alliance Foundation, Dalio Philanthropies, and OceanX, and in partnership with Woods Hole and Oceanographic Institution. The work, which will be on display at the UN every night this week through Friday, seeks to draw attention to biodiversity and the critical role of the ocean and the Ocean Twilight Zone in particular to global climate. So now just to close, as we look at this amazing artwork, and how we're all the metaphor of the siphonophore, that we're all in this together for enhancing group survival. I want to just, go back to Edie talking about the case for optimism, and ask each of the rest of you, when you think about the future of the ocean, the climate, the Twilight Zone, where does your optimism come from if you are optimistic? It's and what should, I think, people who are watching this take away from it?
Don't all speak at once.
Yeah.
Edie?
Oh, you want me to start? I already just.
Edie already did it. She can go
spiel.
Well, for me, I think the optimism comes from the falling in love with it. Many, many people like Jacques Cousteau inspired a lot of people. And I think that when many millions, we estimate in our case, what we're doing, between 500 million and 1 billion people will regularly watch what's going on down there, and I think we'll understand it more, and the capacity of humanity to save the things that they fall in love with, I think can be great. So I think the awareness and the capacity of people in love with the ocean and realizing its importance can have a big impact. That's what I'm hoping.
I think there's a difference between hope and optimism. I'm hopeful.
Okay, that's what I'm optimistic.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because humans are resourceful, and we are the possessors of consciousness, like a higher consciousness, in the sense that we can anticipate the future. We can think about the future. Most animals can't think much about the future, and we can plan for it. It's like the jelly bean test. There are certain children that if you say you can have one jelly bean now, but if you wait 15 minutes, you can have 2 jelly beans. Half of them fail that test and just take the jelly bean, and the other half can wait 15 minutes. We all have to pass the jelly bean test. We have to understand that the future is coming at us like a freight train, and we have to embrace that challenge. But we're good at challenges, and we're good at adaptation. I mean, Edie said the number one thing we have is exploration. But exploration is a form of adaptation. People had to go look over the hill to see if there was a place better over there with more fruit or more game or whatever. And we always have been moving around the planet. It's only in the last century that we've really gotten to look much below the oceans. We've got to gather a lot of data down there to know what to do. But we can't wait until we know everything about the ocean. We have to act on what we know already. When the house is on fire, you got to do something about it. When I think about our leadership, our governments, our business leadership, and how they're like really just in this horrible failure mode right now to really process this problem, I look at the average person and say it's got to be bottom up. We have to inspire people. We do that with our media projects, with our films, with the images that we bring back. We do have to educate them. We don't want to numb people with knowledge. Every bit of knowledge you try to hand somebody has to come with a sense of empowerment, that this knowledge gives you individually the power to do something about it. And whether that's change our energy consumption, change our throwaway mentality, change our consumption of goods, change the way we eat, which affects agriculture. I'm going to just close with one thought here. Paul Allen, who was a great explorer himself and philanthropist, co-founder of Microsoft, friend of mine, I'm happy to say, asked me once point blank, how do we save the oceans? I gave him the wrong answer. What I should have said, I said stuff like what we've all been saying. I should have said, you save the oceans on land. You talk about that farmer in Idaho and how that person realizes their life is connected to what's going on hundreds or thousands of feet down below the water, thousands of miles away, that it's all connected. The only way you're going to save the ocean is to get everybody to understand the connectivity between themselves and the ocean and the consequences of what they do and how it all sort of winds up in the ocean. That's what I got.
That's great. Peter, do you want to take us out?
I'll keep my comments short, but I was actually really struck in reading Edie's book. First of all, I recommend you all buy it. It's an incredible journey, both for herself and for the reader and for the planet, to the point that Jim just made. And there's one quote in there that just absolutely rung through my bones, and I wanted to share it. It's the world will not perish for want of wonders, but for want of wonder. And it's that, that respect for not just knowledge, but what happens to you when you see something for the first time, when you realize the interconnectedness of the planet and all, our dependence on the functioning of something that's largely hidden from us. And so one of the things that most appealed to me in joining the Woods Hole Oceanographic, and it's a narrative I've heard tonight, is our agency, our willingness, our eagerness to tell that story of the ocean that's largely hidden from view. And I think so much of what we've heard tonight is just how deep a function it serves for humanity. And I think it's up to us, and certainly up to me, to to help our scientists, to help humanity understand this.
Yeah, thank you, Edith. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
No, except that it's just so wonderful to see that display on the side of the UN building. I mean, that is a fantastic way to make a lot of people aware of something that I think is just so much out of sight and out of mind. And I commend all of those that were involved in making it happen.
I wonder if that siphonophore knew he was going to be so famous. I mean, his phone is blowing up right now. Everybody's saying, dude, you're famous.
Well,
and it's amazing, right? Those organisms are, what's responsible for this carbon cycling that we were just talking about. These humble organisms are just so fundamentally important.
Yes, well, you are also fundamentally important as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to educate all of us. And it's been really fascinating to hear from all of you. And I hope the audience, I hope you all enjoyed this as well. Unfortunately, we're over time, but it went by so quickly. So on behalf of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, I want to thank James Cameron, Ray Dalio, Peter Menocal, and Edith Widder for participating in this fascinating conversation about the Ocean Twilight Zone and its critical role in global climate. And to all of you who tuned in for the biggest virtual program that Woods Hole has ever put on, thank you as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tatiana.
Thank you, Tatiana, for hosting.
Tatiana, thank you all.